This is the story of a local newspaper and the community it serves. A local bus is taking the people of the countryside, the people of village and farmstead, into their market town. All over Britain, the life of the countryside centres on the market town. Along its busy streets are the shops and offices which supply the district with goods and services. Once a week, on market day, the town becomes the business place of the farming community. The crowds who fill the streets and jostle round the stalls in the main square are there to do the family shopping. In the cattle market, livestock from the neighbouring farmlands is bought and sold. Here in Newbury and the district which surrounds it, you will find an ordinary country community of industrious, hard-working people. Their way of life is reflected week by week in the pages of their local newspaper, the Newbury Weekly News. Its editor is a familiar figure, Mr. Hugh Turner. He's a big, friendly man whose father started the paper over 80 years ago. He knows his readers intimately, and they know him as a man who will only print what he believes to be the truth. Just off the main street are the offices of the newspaper, and over the office is Mr. Turner's home. In fact, his dining room is also his office. From here, he directs the running of the paper. His chief reporter, Mr. Willis, who's been with the paper for 35 years, has come to consult him. The paper is independent, and Mr. Turner is responsible for its policy. His decisions are not influenced by any political party or outside financial interests. In the reporter's room, where Mr. Willis works, the newspaper really begins. It's his job to see that the news is gathered in. Every day, information from the surrounding countryside comes in by post and by telephone. But the chief work of collecting the news falls on the individual reporter. For news of interest to women, a woman's approach. This reporter is off with the photographer to cover a local wedding. She'll take down details of the ceremony, describe the bride's dress, name the guests. For news of this kind, Mr. Willis can always arrange for a reporter to be present, and in a special diary he enters forthcoming events of local interest. Any local event of interest to the paper's readers is news. Local sport is news. A violin recital given by a member of the town's women's guild is news. The bigger the occasion, the greater the news value. An important annual event in a farming community is the agricultural show. It'll have a whole page devoted to it. From all over the district, farmers bring animals and produce to be judged by experts. It's a big reporting job. Mr. Willis himself is there. Another reporter interviews a well-known farmer whose views on the show may be of interest. But there's another kind of news of which there can be no previous warning. Mr. Willis has an understanding with the fire brigade, and when the alarm goes, the man left on duty phones him to tell him where the fire is. minutes, he's on the spot, getting the details of the story. A regular feature of any country paper is the weekly Magistrates' Court. This reporter is on his way to cover one now. As he walks towards the court, he sees something on the other side of the road. An accident. Only a minor one, and nobody's badly hurt, except the bicycle. But it's a bad corner. There have been a number of accidents there recently. He takes a few notes. His editor will be interested. At the magistrate's court, it's his job to report the cases that are heard. The main case this time is a man charged with driving his car dangerously. It's of particular interest because the man happens to be a well-to-do tradesman, an influential person in the town. But this won't make any difference to the report that will go into the newspaper. The case will be described fully and accurately. As the man leaves the witness box, his solicitor gets up to plead his case. He's unsuccessful, and the magistrate pronounces the man guilty. The reporter notes down that he's to be fined and his license to drive a car taken from him for a year. However rich and important the offender, the facts will be given to the public. Mr. Turner, the editor, is just starting his lunch when the reporter's story about the street accident is brought into him. He's interested. For a long time, he's been urging the town council to put traffic control lights at this particular corner. After lunch, he goes with the reporter and studies the scene of the accident. It's quite clear what happened, and he feels it supports his case for traffic control lights. In the reporter's room, he talks over the matter with Mr. Goddard, his assistant editor, and learns that this particular question is to be discussed at the next meeting of the town council. He decides to wait for their decision. Returning to his office, he meets Mrs. Margaret Scruton, Newbury's local poet. Every week for over 30 years, she's written a short poem for the paper. The business of collecting the week's news goes on. To the reporter's room come stories sent in by correspondents in the outlying villages. These village correspondents get paid for their work, but they're just ordinary folk. At one village, it's the church organist. At another, the railway porter. At the village of Inkpen, it's the school teacher. Sometimes people in the village come to her with news, but more often she has to go and find it herself. She's heard that the local dramatic society has started rehearsals of a play. Watches the rehearsal with the producer and finds out details of the play and who's taking part in it. At home that evening, she writes her story for the newspaper. So, day by day, the news of this small area comes in and is finally passed to the assistant editor. It's his job to make certain that the stories are accurate and also to assess their news value. If they're too long, he cuts them. Finally, he writes the headline or caption. From his desk, the news stories go to the compositor, whose linotype machine makes the type. Line by line, the metal words fall into place. Before the type is prepared for the big press, a proof is pulled so that any mistakes can be corrected. All this time, the paper's advertising manager has also been at work, arranging for shops and other commercial concerns to take advertising space. As well as the large advertisements, there are scores of small ones that are of great interest to the readers. For instance, they learn that young Mr. Brown wants to sell his motorcycle, as he's now the proud owner of a small car. Or that Mr. Jackson's beekeeping venture is a success, as he's advertising for sale large quantities of honey. As the day of publication approaches, the stories and advertisements in proof form are made up into pages by the assistant editor. Only one big story remains to be covered, the council meeting. For this, a space is left open. The council meets at the town hall, and one of the first things it discusses is the problem of the traffic lights. The press has the right to be present by law, and Mr. Willis sits at the table reserved for reporters and listens to the debate. Opinions differ. Some councillors are in favour, others oppose the measure because of the cost. The mayor of Newbury puts the matter to the vote. The clerk of the council counts the votes in favour, and the votes against. And the mayor announces that the majority decision is against the proposed traffic control lights. Mr. Turner has heard the result of the council meeting, but he has his own independent view of the matter. He will write another strong article about the number of accidents at this corner and will publish letters showing the views of his readers. In the end, the weight of public opinion will produce action. Now the heavy blocks of type, page by page, are finally being prepared for the presses. It's evening when the big press starts to turn. Soon, copies of the complete paper are coming off at the rate of 2,000 an hour. The paper begins the journey to its readers, by van, by local train, by bus, and finally to the quiet places of the countryside, within a dozen miles or so of Newbury. The district have read in the daily newspapers from the larger cities the news of national importance, news of distant places and big events. In their own weekly newspaper, they look forward to the local news, The news that's about them and the events which directly affect their day-to-day life. People of town and country alike read it with the respect it's earned over the years. They know that its information is accurate and impartial, and that it faithfully serves the community. In its own intimate way, it reflects the life of a whole district. It's one of many hundreds of small newspapers which are an essential and democratic part of everyday life in Britain.